Hello, class. This is Professor Fisher, continuing chapter 13, section 2, the cranial nerves. The cranial nerves, which is a significant portion of the peripheral nervous system. The cranial nerves. All right, so we have 3 cranial nerves that only contain sensory neurons, olfactory. Think of your smell. Optic, think of the eye. Vestibular, cochlear, think of the ear. Right? And we have those cranial nerves here. All right. So the olfactory nerve terminates in the medial temporal lobe. Structures of the limbic system include the limbic cortex, hippocampus, and the amygdala. Right. And its function is for smell, sense of smell. For the optic, its function is transmitting visual stimuli in the form of action potentials to the brain. For the vestibulocochlear, its function, its neurons depolarize in response to body position, and so are concerned with balance and equilibrium. Right. So when you're off balance, your body can sense it. All right. So this is cranial nerve number 1, 2, and 8. We also have motor cranial nerves. Cranial nerves with motor functions: ocular motor, trochlear, abducens, accessory, hypoglossal. Right. So these primarily have motor neurons. Right. So your ocular motor, ocular, think of eye, motor, moving the eye. Right. So we have function of moving the eyeball, opening the eye, constricting the pupil, changing the lens shape. The trochlear, as a somatic motor neuron, innervates the superior oblique muscle. Also in the eye. Then we have the abducens. The somatic motor neurons innervate the lateral rectus muscle. Right. And these are all dealing with the eye, movement of the eyes. And this is cranial nerves number 3, number 4, and number 6. We also have the accessory nerve. Cranial component of the accessory nerve innervates certain muscles of speech. And then the hypoglossal nerve, motor nerve that innervates the muscles of the tongue. So it does not play any role in this taste sensation, but innervates the tongue. All right. So remember, cranial nerves that go directly to the brain, do not go to the spinal cord. And then the last group of cranial nerves, last 5, have both sensory and motor: the trigeminal, the facial, glossopharyngeal, and the vagus. All right. So the trigeminal is going to have a motor function shown above. The motor axons supply the masseter and the temporalis muscles, which elevate the mandible close to the jaw. Also has sensory in that area shown above. The skin over the middle of the face and the mandible area. The facial nerve, sensations on the face, 2/3 of the tongue, the external ear, the nasal cavity. All that sensory is in regards to the facial nerve. Also move the muscles of the face. So facial expressions come from the facial nerve. We also have the glossopharyngeal nerve. Chemoreceptors of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Right. This is where we have our sense of taste. We also have the motor branches of this nerve supply muscles around the pharynx. It's responsible for swallowing. This is also where we can get some of our gag reflex from, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So all of these cranial nerves, you can read through these charts, have different functions. Some have sensory, some have motor, and some have sensory and motor functions. And then we have the vagus, which affects, has a huge realm. Sensory, serving the skin around the ear. Sensory neurons, taste sensation from the pharynx. Visceral sensory, mucous membranes of the pharynx. Has motor functions, muscles around the pharynx, the larynx, contractor and speaking and swallowing. All right, this is all in the vagus nerve. All right, so we have all these different cranial nerves here, some with only sensory, like the optic and the olfactory, your smell and your sight, some with only motor, like the facial. Some with motor and sensory, like the facial, motor and sensory. Some with just motor, like the accessory or the hypoglossal. And so these are the different cranial nerves and the different things that they do. Go through, look at the charts, study the chart so that you understand which cranial nerves do which or have which functions. Bell's palsy is an issue caused by malfunction of a cranial nerve. All right. In Bell's palsy, the motor root of the facial nerve, which has motor and sensory, but the motor root of the facial nerve is can be impaired by a virus, tumor, some other trauma. It can have unknown causes. It can happen on its own, and people don't always know why it happens. But for some reason, the motor root, the root of that nerve gets impaired by whatever has caused the problem, and you have paralysis on one side of your face. So those muscles on one side of your face won't move because that facial nerve, it won't be able to send the proper signals to be able to cause movement on that side of the face. Sometimes it can last a couple of days, sometimes it can last weeks. And there's different ways to treat it. Sorry for the airplane flying in the background, but such a beautiful day outside. I said, let me be outside. And all of my cranial nerves are sensing the environment around me. My facial nerve, my whole factory is smelling these flowers, trees around me. My optic nerves are looking at the screen, trying to share with you the information. My vestibulocochlear nerve is actually at work right now, balancing me in this chair. If I lean too much to the side, it'll remind me you're going to be off balance and help me to get back on track. So go through that when you're studying the cranial nerves. Take a moment to think about, well, okay, when will this nerve work? And we kind of did this in lab, but go through it on your own and, when is this nerve working? When is that nerve working? And it'll help you to remember the different cranial nerves. All right, with the spinal nerves, which is the other big portion of your nerves, we have spinal nerve. See here, it's short, divides into two mixed nerves, carry both somatic, motor, and sensory information. Right, so motor and sensory. Motor is movement. Sensory is sensing the environment around us. The posterior ramus Remember posterior, anterior from chapter 1. Posterior ramus travels to the posterior side of the body, the back of the body. The anterior ramus travels to the anterior side of the body, or to the upper or lower limb, anterior, front of the body. Okay? Don't let this diagram get too confusing. I know it can be a little confusing when we look at it. We're going to talk about spinal nerves and nerve plexuses, and it can be a little confusing when we look at it. But if you see here, what we're looking at is a transverse cut of the spinal cord, spinal column. You see the anterior and posterior labeled, so the front and the back is labeled. You see the the transverse section of the spinal cord. We can see the gray and the right and the white, the gray and the white matter of the spinal cord. And then we see an example of a spine of the spinal nerves. All right, the anterior ramus is coming off the anterior side and sort of feeds the anterior part of the body. Posterior ramus is goes to the posterior side of the body, right? And these are, we know that they're primarily mixed nerves, the spinal nerves. They have a sensory and motor axons all together mixed in. Right. And this is another diagram just showing you sort of the direction of sensation, direction of sort of information as well, how things will be carried, motor signals, sensory signals, which direction they will be going. Clearly, the anterior root carries the somatic and visceral motor signals. Motor signals are going from the CNS to the PNS, versus sensory signals are going from the PNS to the CNS, from our surroundings to our central nervous system. Right? Now, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and we break that down based on location in the body. Right? So 8 pairs of cervical nerves, 8 pairs, pairs 2, 8 pairs of cervical nerves, cervical and the cervical spine, cervical and the cervical spine. Then you have 12 pairs of thoracic. We're just working our way down. So 8, 12, 5 in the lumbar sacral region, and then 1 in the coccygeal, one pair of coccygeal nerves. All right, so just working our way down the body: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and then from the coccyx. Notice this point here, the anterior rami of the cervical, lumbar, and sacral, so everything but the thoracic, each merge to form nerve plexuses. And that's important because these are complex sort of networks of nerves crossing over each other. So, and that's important because you have multiple nerves innervating the same muscles, the same body parts. All right. So, if one nerve were damaged, for instance, because you have a nerve plexus, you could still innervate that structure because there's other nerves going to it, other nerves providing motor, other nerves providing sensing. All right, so this is what it looks like. Cervical nerves, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, coccygeal, right? And you see sort of the thoracic are the only ones that seem to be more just the straight lines, whereas you see in the cervical, the lumbar, the sacral, you see how the axons have a crossing over. We have like a nerve plexus, so it's like spaghetti bowl almost. All right, so, oops, hold on. Cervical plexus. All right and left cervical plexuses deep in the neck. All right, this is C1 to C5 in the cervical spine. Each nerve has cutaneous branches, cutaneous skin, innervate the skin of the neck and the head. and skin of the neck and sections of the head, chest, and shoulders. Have motor branches that innervate the specific muscles in your neck. So the muscles, it makes sense. The muscles in your neck are innervated by the cervical plexus, the nerves coming out of the cervical spine. Phrenic nerve is a major nerve. It innervates the diaphragm. Breathe, diaphragm. And these are your cervical plexuses, and the nerves that are coming out of the different parts of your cervical spine and what they do. So look that over and understand that. Notice the C2, C3, sensory to the skin on the ear. Remember, you also have some of your spinal nerves that help with sensation around the ear as well. So we have multiple nerves working together. All right. The phrenic nerve is the motor, provides the motor for the diaphragm. So that's how come if you break somebody's neck, they can stop breathing. Don't do that. All right. Brachial plexuses, working our way down. Right and left brachial plexuses. Right. So they have motor and sensory innervation to the upper limbs. Upper limbs, my arms, brachial plexuses. So from my brachial spinal cord. Right. This is from C1 to T1. Brachial plexuses begin with formation of large nerve trunks. Usually unite to C5 and C6, unite to form a superior trunk, C7 a middle trunk, and C8 and T1 inferior trunk. All right, so we have this brachial plexus, which is still from the cervical spine, but also from the thoracic spine. Right, innervating the upper limbs. All right, just some more information about the brachial plexus and how it splits. The anterior division of the inferior trunk forms the medial cord, descends to the medial arm. We also have a lateral cord, which descends down the lateral arm. Posterior divisions of each trunk unite to form the posterior cord, lies in the posterior arm. So the sensation in your arms the signal is sent to structures in your cervical and your spine down to the beginning of your thoracic spine. Brachial plexuses, right? So the cervical plexuses are more so for the face and the diaphragm, and then the brachial plexuses are more for the upper limbs. Right, some of the major nerves of the brachial plexuses: the axillary nerve, deltoid and teres minor muscles and skin over the deltoid region. Here, your radial nerve innervates your triceps brachii muscle. Here, your musculocutaneous nerve innervates interior arm. Remember, in anatomical position, palms are forward, your anterior arm muscles, including your biceps brachii here, and the skin covering your lateral arm. The median nerve innervates the wrist and digital flexors. Some of the intrinsic muscles of your hand, the skin over your anterior thumb. Right here. The ulnar nerve innervate the flexor muscles in the forearm, not innervated by the median nerve. Most of the intrinsic hand muscles in the fifth digit, medial side of the fourth digit. Here. All right. So that's your brachial plexuses. Right. So we have cervical plexuses, brachial plexuses, nerves crossing over, multiple nerves going to innervate. Right. Then we have our thoracic spinal nerves, moving further down, except for T1, because T1 is included in the brachial plexus. Our thoracic spinal nerves innervate the deep back muscles, right? And the anterior ramus travel between the two ribs as the intercostal nerve. So we have the left and right lumbar plexuses. Right. This is L1, L5. Oh, sorry. That's the thoracic spinal nerves. Now we have, after we get past the thoracic, we have the lumbar and the lumbar plexuses, L1 and through L5. Anterior to the vertebrae, embedded deep within the psoas muscle, branches innervate the pelvic structure. So for going past the thorax, further down into your lumbar region, right? Branches innervate the pelvic structures in the lower extremity. You can see that there. Some of the lumbar plex division, obturator nerve, enters the thigh, pelvis, the obturator foramen, innervate the abductor muscles, that's the inner thighs. Adductor muscles, the hip joint, the skin over the medial aspect of the thigh. The femoral nerve, largest branch of the lumbar plexus. You have the anterior thigh muscles and skin over the anterior medial thigh and leg, as well as the knee joint. All right. So being able to bend your leg at the knee, actually straighten it once it's bent. Your femoral nerve helps you do that. These are your structures at play in the lumbar plexuses. And then lastly, we have one more after this, the sacral plexuses, the nerves, the complex nerves coming together out of the sacral portion of your spinal column. And these innervate structures in the pelvis, gluteal region, the butt, and much of the lower extremities. These plexuses are divided into anterior and posterior divisions as well. Right. These are the structures here. You see all the different nerves crossing over each other, forming this plexus. Now, many of you probably have heard of the sciatic nerve. Here is where we discuss that. The longest and largest nerve in the body. Right. So it contains axons from both the anterior and posterior divisions of the sacral plexus, travels through the sciatic notch in the pelvis, innervates the hip and the posterior thigh before it divides into tibial and common fibular. Those are lower leg, tibial and common fibular nerves. So that's why you can, an issue you have way up here in your back, you can feel it all the way down in your lower leg because of the sciatic nerve, longest nerve in the body, right? So it starts from the sacral region of your spinal column, innervates the hip, the thigh, and all the way down to your tibia fibula that's down in the lower leg. Further divisions of the sacral plexus are you have branches that innervate the hamstrings, innervate the knee and ankle joints, and the common fibular nerve. You have also the ability to supply part of the knee joint, the skin of the anterior and distal leg, right? So the anterior leg, distal, further from the insertion point, which would be the hip. And this is the diagram showing you the sacral plexuses. So all the way down the leg. Remember, to be able to touch your toe and to feel something, that there has to be nerve endings there to be able to send the signal back to your spinal cord, to be able to send it to the brain to let you know that whatever is touching your big toe, my brain has to register it, and the interneurons in my brain have to figure out exactly what it is. So I need nerves to send signals all the way back up to the brain. right, so here we have just a summary of the cutaneous, the skin distribution of spinal plexuses. So where different parts of the body, that where the sensory information on different parts of the body um, is controlled by, right? So it shows you where the brachial plexus, the lumbar plexus, the sacral plexus, and where they're sending their sensory information, where they're gathering sensory information from in different parts of the body, right? And then also we have the motor and how the cervical, the brachial, the lumbar, and the sacral plexuses control different parts of the body. All right. So notice how the body is controlled by many different nerves.